Good morning, and thank you for joining me for today's panel event, APIs as a Value Generator. I'm delighted to be joined by some of our favourite clients this morning, including Jacqui Leggetter, Head of Integration at the Department for Work and Pensions, Kevin Deering, Head of API Ecosystems at NatWest Group, and Benny Boye Johansen, Head of OpenAPI at Saxo Bank. I'm shortly going to pass you over to your chair for this morning's event, Scott Logic's Innovation Director, Graham Odds. But before I do, I'll just run you through a couple of housekeeping points. Now, if you'd like to ask a question, just pop it into the question box. And this is an important point because we're not going to do the Q&A at the end like we usually do. Instead, Graham will be keeping an eye on the question box and will pose your questions to the panel as we go along. Finally, I will drop a link in the chat box to a very short 1-minute survey that will ask you to complete at the end of today's event. And if you don't already have a copy of Graham's excellent white paper, Open Your Eyes to APIs, you can request a copy in the survey. Also, as we always do, we like to support a charity with these events. And for this one, we will donate £5 for each completed survey to the Trussell Trust, a charity that was set up to fight food poverty in the UK by providing food banks. But without further ado, let me pass you over to your chair, Graham.
Hi there, welcome everyone to this panel discussion. Before we get going, I just wanted to put a bit of context on this conversation in the round. The first thing I think we all need to acknowledge is that APIs are not new, right? They've been around pretty much since the dawn of digital technology. So, at times it can feel quite odd, especially to technologists, to be talking about APIs as though they are something new. But really what has changed around it, in my mind at least, is that digital technology is no longer like a sector or a concern into itself, right? All business, pretty much, all organizations in the modern era are sort of inextricably intertwined with the digital world. And to that end, it kind of amazes me how many organizations still struggle to sort of recognize and embrace the very vast and disparate value that can be generated by APIs, but only if you actually elevate them beyond just being considered a sort of a technical requirement. So to that end, to talk about that point, I'm really, really delighted to be joined by some people from organizations who are really shining examples of where they have really embraced the value that APIs can generate. So Benny, I thought I'd start with you. Apologies, Saxo Bank is not a household name in the UK. Could you give us a brief introduction into who Saxo Bank are, but then also give us some concrete example of a success story around APIs and why you think it's something that people should care about?
Sure. Thanks, Graham. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm Benny from Saxo Bank, and as you say, we're not as well known as NatWest and DWP, but I would still say we are a pretty special place, right? We used to call ourselves a fintech before that term was even born. From day one, we were half IT and half financial people, right? But we are Saxo Bank, and we have a banking license in a couple of countries. But most importantly, we're really a global financial institution that allows people to trade, the world's financial markets. So we have a platform, and using that platform, you can trade anything you can imagine: stocks, futures, bonds, currencies, anything like that. And we have a client footprint which is not just Denmark, not just UK, not just Europe, but essentially around the world. I think for this discussion, it's probably important to understand that why we started just offering this platform to our own clients, so our own clients could trade. Then for the last many years, we've also had a fairly sizable, should we say, partnering integration business, where we are essentially offering our technology to other banks and brokers. So you could potentially be a client of Bank X, you could be logging into Bank X's net portal, and all the trading that would be going on there would actually be done by Saxo. We would deliver the technical infrastructure, but we would also have all the business processes and licenses and everything necessary to actually make that happen. And this, of course, is a place where then something like OpenAPI plays well, because then OpenAPIs allows us to make those integration even deeper and more seamless, right? You also asked about a success story. I mean, I'm leaning towards it already now. I talked about the fact that because we have an OpenAPI, we can now integrate in an even deeper way to get better client experiences for the people who partner with us and use our technology. And I'm sure we can talk about that more in depth a little bit later. But I think the other thing is, which is probably as interesting for some of the people here, is that it's also allowed us to scale our development efforts to a large extent. Because we have an API now, it's much easier for us to add new teams, or both on the front end and the back end. And I think I'll leave it with that for now, and then hand it over to you again.
Yeah, we'll certainly be coming back to those points, because I think there's a lot more to delve into there. I guess moving on to Jacqui, a similar question really. Do you want to just briefly explain Department of Work and Pensions, and at least what's in your scope, and one of your success stories around APIs?
Sure. Morning, everyone. So in the Department for Work and Pensions, obviously we're a large government organisation, and we support 23 million citizens across the UK and abroad. Now, if you think about the level of citizens that we support, from retirement and bereavement, unemployed, disabled or unable to work through ill health, children and low-income families, it's a really diverse group of people, that a broad spectrum of society. And when we think about those citizens, we've spent a lot of time doing transformations in policy or subgroup silos. So if you are claiming your retirement pension, you will have a really great digital experience in your retirement pension journey. But if you're a retirement pensioner with additional needs, for example, you have a disability, or you're caring for someone, for us that means you will have a different journey for that different need. So while we've been working with APIs, as you say, Dan, they've been around a long time, and we've been looking at how we can use APIs not only for process automation, but for providing a holistic journey for the citizen. So at the point of entry, not only self-service and process automation, but gathering enough information that enables us to use our API economy under the hood, invisible to the citizen, so that we can surface and service those complex needs. And that's really driving our application reference architecture and our overall strategy right now, to start to see that holistic citizen view and serve those holistic citizen needs. So we're starting to drive that through delivery through the API economy. Now, for us, what we've been looking at as well is not just across DWP, government is a complex body to interact with. How do we start to take advantage and help citizens and share things cross-government? So we've created a cross-government API register that hooks into the DWP API portal, which we'll talk about as an enabler a little bit later on. But certainly having the APIs available for people to easily discover, test and consume has been really powerful for us across government. And one of the use cases that I would talk about, and we talk about our APIs about outcomes and business drivers, not about the API itself. And one of the use cases that we identified was working with the NHS. As we know, every penny spent in the NHS is critical to go on care. And we identified that the prescription exemption process was a really complex process for the NHS, and DWP play a key role in that process, because one of the qualifying conditions for a free prescription is if you're in receipt of a certain benefit or at a certain rate. And there was no connection between DWP and the NHS to enable us to do that check. So most people on this call will probably be familiar with a visit to the GP, picking up a prescription, taking it to the pharmacist, signing it on the back, or paying over your money, and then it goes in a after the fact process. And there's an awful lot of error in that process. The rules are quite complex. People don't understand what they're entitled to. And equally, some people don't pick up the prescription because of the cost, because they're not aware that they're entitled to free. So we've opened up an API available to the NHS real time. So the citizen, when at the point where they are picking up the medication from the pharmacy, the pharmacist enters the details on their system, and that calls an API in the DWP that does a real-time person validation check and benefit check, and we send back a yes/no answer to the pharmacist there and then. And it means that at the point of dispensing the medication, we're really clear on whether that person's entitled to a free prescription or not, and therefore they can have their medication and move on. Now, across the NHS, in terms of making that a real-time interactive process with the citizen and the pharmacist, that has removed, or will remove, when it's fully rolled out, over £200 million a year in costs from the NHS in chasing up, doing the post checks after the fact, and then chasing up and outsourcing the collection of the debt when people have had the prescription free that shouldn't have. So if we think that one API is generating over £200 million worth of savings in the NHS, that's money that can go back into critical care, needed now more than ever. And we extrapolate that across many other government departments for use cases. The reuse element, just to mention finally on that API, is really good for us, because in exposing that API to the NHS, there's a lot of reuse in the APIs that underpin that, in terms of blue badge, disability, parking passes, and all sorts of things, free school meals that also depend on benefit entitlement. So building that single API enables us to service multiple cross-government needs. So that's one of our many big successes in the API world.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful example of, not just the economic value that's generated there, but also, frankly, frustration and paperwork and awkwardness and all those kind of things. We're actually, it is using the real power of the things that digital systems do beautifully, which is real-time moving around of information and simple decision making, frankly. Yeah, thank you for that, Jacqui. Moving on to Kevin here. Let's start with a similar thing. Could you briefly introduce NatWest Group and talk about some of the success story that you've had with APIs there?
Of course. Thank you, Graham, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. At NatWest, we are very passionate about our API creation, and we're also very open about it. I'll come on to talk about that a little bit later. We see openness as essential to the success of our API agenda. So yeah, excited for the opportunity to talk about it. Just briefly then on my own role, just as a quick introduction. So I work in the open banking team. I think attendees from the UK will be very familiar with open banking in the UK, but also PSD2 that's come along since open banking. So I'm in the team that's delivered open banking, and I'm responsible for maximizing the commercial opportunity that comes along with open banking, rather than the actual mandatory delivery. So my background is not a technology background. I just head off any tech-focused questions that might come along later by saying I'm not from a technology background. I'm from the business. My previous role was head of pricing for the NatWest Retail Bank, and that's very deliberate because we're looking to commercialize and seek opportunities from open banking. My background from the business suits the role really well. So that's myself. In terms of the one opportunity I wanted to just call out in response to your question, the success. I'm not going to call out necessarily our biggest, or even actually something that's live. It's something we did briefly last year. It's quite a small example, but I think it really kind of summarizes what we're about with APIs. And that is our pilot that we ran with Google Voice. So like I say, it was a short-term trial. It was only for a limited small number of customers, but it perfectly sums up what we're about with APIs. And that's because that trial with Google Voice reused one of our mandatory APIs, an API we built for open banking. And the internal team that develops the Google Voice solution were able to reuse that mandatory API because when we built those APIs, and I'll come on and talk about this a little bit more later, we've been very specific, very determined to make them maximize the reuse potential around the bank, make them easily available to teams around the bank. So when the innovation team that wanted to stand up a trial of a voice project trial, they were able to spin out that trial really quickly and cheaply, to be honest, much more quickly and cheaply than they would have done had that API not existed, or they'd not been able to have access to that API. And if something's quick and cheap, especially if it's a brand new thing you're testing, then you're much more likely to get approval to do it. You don't need to spend months on a business case, on prioritization. You don't need to spend a long time securing the skilled resource. If you've got off-the-shelf assets, you can reuse to stand up your trial. So I think we might not have done that trial with Google Voice had this API not been available for reuse to internal teams. It just might not have passed the test of affordability and speed. So that test lasted a few weeks. We got some great feedback from customers, and it's kind of test and learn. So we closed down the trial, we gathered the feedback, and we're now assessing where we go next with that project. And like I said, we would not have got those learnings had the API not been available. And it's a success because we're the first bank in the UK where a NatWest customer could say, "Okay, Google, what's my bank balance?" And that's a great thing to have achieved for us.
I know from personal experience how quick and easy these things can be when you have the APIs there to play with. I think one of my first experiments with Alexa was hooking up my bank balance just for myself. It was a hacked piece of mess, but it took hours rather than weeks or days. It also caused great embarrassment for me across the office as everyone in the office suddenly heard what my bank balance was being shouted at by my computer. So there's certainly a way of experimenting quickly and easily. So I'm going to come back around to Benny here, but I guess for everyone else here, these success stories are fantastic. But a lot of us have that experience of still needing to convince the organization we work for that this is a thing that you need to do. And having some examples to point to is great. But Benny, I thought, would you be able to take us through sort of some of the obstacles that Saxo had to overcome, or you had to overcome at Saxo to get the buy-in to do your open APIs? I mean, you're a fintech organization, or before it was a thing, but still there. I believe you had. It wasn't a slam dunk from day one.
No, it was not, and I think there are several reasons. Also, just bear in mind that while you see an API now, our first attempt at doing it actually started in 2013. So at the now I think you can at least see, well, they are doing it, and PSD2 says you're doing it. But in 2013, it was a little bit of a different situation. I'd point to two challenges. The one I'll mention briefly, and the other one I think you're fishing for, I'll spend a little more time on. But just imagine building an API in 2013 compared to doing it now. Just think of the tools that are available now compared to back then. And also think about that the API that we propose is not just supporting standard REST request response. If you've ever tried using a standard trading application, there's a lot of things going on there. You will have live updated prices. As soon as you place the trade, you want instant confirmation, etc. So we actually had to figure out not just to do the REST part, but also have to interface to a distributed trading system and being able to stream out updates at a significant rate already back then. So this is kind of what we wanted to do, and as we discussed before, I actually tried it in 2013. At the time, I was head of engineering of the part that actually did our different trading platforms, right? So we had a desktop trading platform, we just had a web platform, we had a mobile platform, and as head of engineering, I went to our CTO and we said, hey, we really need to do one uniform one uniform interface, because if we have that, it's going to be much nicer, and look at all the clutter we can get rid of, right? We don't need one interface back to the servers for the desktop, and another one for the mobile, and another for the website. And actually, there might even be some possibilities once we have it that it would be, you know, something we could give to our partners. So based on that, we started the project, and 6 months later or so, we stopped it again. And mostly, I think the reason was that internally it was considered to be a technical exercise. You know, we drawn up some very, very nice diagrams showing, you know, this is a big mess, but look how nice it's going to be. We convinced top management that that was really good, etc. But it really was not formulated in a way that it could compete with other business opportunities coming in. So should we be spending 20 people doing this technical enhancement, or should we go and pursue maybe introduction of a new trading feature in one of our key client segments? So it actually took a little while. But then after a while, we decided maybe we should focus, as I think you already were mentioning, Jacqui, focus on the business instead, and also you, Kevin, right? Focus on the business and the business value. So we actually came back late 2014 and said, no, the new proposal is to do the same, but there's 3 reasons you want to do it, right? It's going to make it faster to develop. It's going to allow us to have a broader offering, so more business. And it's going to save us some money, right? So you can say in the first time, we almost didn't even say save money. We just said, hey, it's going to be technically better. And now we came back to say to business, look, if we build an API, we can develop, once it's over, we can develop stuff faster. Just like you were saying, Kevin, if somebody comes up with an idea, hey, we want to do Google Voice interface, you know, we can do it easily because we have suddenly have an API. Or as we just discussed before, Graham, right? I believe we have just sent a request to Scott Logic for a number of new developers to help us as we're expanding, and we're able to bring on new developers much quicker because they only have to look at the API, right? So that's the faster part. And the broader part are all of the things that also have been touched upon a little bit. But in my case, now we can go to partners we could not reach before, because we can offer them to deeply integrate into their netbank, for example. You know, before we could only offer a branded version of a separate platform saying, hey, this is the X bank branded trading platform, but you could always see this was Saxo. Now with an API, a bank can totally hide Saxo, and they can also pick and choose which parts they want, right? So that has allowed us suddenly to offer, our offering to more clients in a different manner and reach markets that we couldn't have before. For example, we have a pretty large client base in China, and you can imagine, and even if we have been sitting in Copenhagen and done a very nice design of a trading platform that fits European standards, maybe that's not exactly how we wanted to look everywhere in the world, including in certain parts of Asia. Then it's very nice that you can have a partnership with somebody who really knows how to do that in a local region. And I can mention many, many examples of where we have from day one known that the best solution is often done by partnering. And by having APIs now, so actually I got into more than this. This was the argument we made, right? But by having APIs now, it just opens up for a number of markets and for a number of solutions that simply were not able before. And this was essentially the pitch that we now made. And that was also the pitch that suddenly meant that we were allowed to do it and do it properly, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's, it's a shared, there's commonalities, I suspect, in how everyone has used variations of that kind of message, but it is, you're right, so hard to sometimes pitch it in business terms where it can seem so obvious from a technical point of view, but it really does need angling that way. And I think, Jacqui, you talked already about, a big part of why DWP started to embrace APIs was, in my words, to stop projecting your silos onto the citizens, right? To stop making your organization their problem. Now, there's an element of delving into how you got over that as well, but I think there's also a related question that's come from the attendees, which is, how and where did you choose to prioritize? How did you get started? Which bit did you go, right, okay, we can't build APIs for everything. DWP is vast, right? Where's the biggest value to be found in the first instance?
Yeah, so I guess just picking up on what Benny said, understanding the business value and the outcome of the API is really critical. And when we first started, we came at this from a technical perspective, like most people dealing with APIs. And people, you know, in business don't get excited necessarily about tech, particularly tech that they can't see. So we looked at what were the barriers. We actually went out and did a lot of user research. We brought in some user researchers and did a lot of user researchers around what was the barriers to reuse, what was the barriers to people understanding how APIs could help them on the journey. And by doing that, we got an awful lot of feedback, but consistent message around how difficult it was to find data, how difficult it was because we had data held in different standards. And we really looked at how we could debunk some of the myths around APIs and APIs, make them less technical. So moving to a contract first and creating a human readable contract, and actually having our business analysts and product owners being the initial instigators of those API contracts, thinking about the service that they're trying to deliver, the data that they need to deliver that service, and an easy register that they can go to find that data, so easy searching. So for us, the prioritization initially was about where can we get best value? So what are the most common data items that people are looking for? And there are things around for us that are quite common. It's probably the same of every organization. Every transaction needs to be validated. So whether you're in interaction with a citizen or another system, there's some element of validation. And if we can make that a common process and therefore a common API that's exposed through a central gateway, and it's available in a portal that's available to business analysts, architects, and engineers, and your portal is a nice, easy, interactive, I'm searching on how to validate a citizen, is there something in the library? And what that enables us to do is start to build reusable, small microservice-based technical components exposed through APIs. So you can have quite a complex service journey that's interacting with multiple lightweight components. And for us, it was about where is our value? And understanding the value of every single API. Sometimes that's a monetary value. So in the NHS, for sure, £200 million back into the NHS was a real focus. But sometimes it's about citizen value for us. So in the response to COVID, nobody could have predicted what was going to happen during COVID. And when we went into lockdown last March, despite the furlough scheme introduced by HMRC, there were about 2.5 million people lost their jobs in the first month of lockdown, national lockdown. And normally those 2.5 million people, for us to help them, part of that validation process would be to invite them in for an interview. But given it was 2.5 million people, we were in lockdown, our premises were closed, we resorted to it was going to be by phone call, but even phoning 2.5 million people would take an inordinate amount of effort. So although there wasn't any monetary value in building an API that could actually validate the citizen was who they said they were by hooking out to passport IDs or driving license numbers or accounts and information that we already hold about them. So by making a quick change on the universal credit system and then introducing a new identity validation API enabled us to fully automate that first verification of a citizen for 2.5 million people. So it is a juggle between financial and benefit of the citizen. For us, being the organisation that we are, the greater good for society will come first. But that comes in itself with a value. So although we drove that API driven by a citizen need, there is a real benefit to that because that validation, that citizen validation API now exists for any new digital service that comes along who wants to validate a citizen at that level. So your reuse, if you build your contract in that human readable format, if you're really clear about the data and what that API can be used for, so you're building it with reuse in mind, even though you don't know who your next person using it is going to be, you will always get value. So we derive value in a number of ways around what's the impact on the citizen service, what's the financial impact, And if we get both, all the better. And obviously, by creating we do contract first, so we create the contract before we create the API. So we have a good understanding of what's going to be contained in that API and the business value. And this is introduced through business analysts, product owners, and service designers before engineers even get involved in it. So we understand the value of that. And as we're prioritizing in backlogs, we have a federated model for delivering the APIs. We don't deliver the APIs out of a central team. So we have a team that will focus on citizen data, and they might have a service for address, a service for relationships, a service for identifying citizens. And those teams will look after their own backlog, and then we proxy them through central gateways to share infrastructure. So we can create multiple things at the same time, and that's the working API economy, that you're not building and you're reducing dependencies, and you're managing your APIs and versioning your APIs really robustly, so we're not breaking changes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess related to Kevin, I wanted to dive in with yourself there, because I know at NatWest Group, open banking APIs have they've sat in a different place, and some of the value you've tried to generate through that has been a bit different. I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah, of course. I think, so I can't speak to how other banks delivered open banking, but one important decision that we made at West right from the start was to put the open banking delivery team within our technology innovation program, which was quite a big call, because normally delivering a big mandatory project, it's as far from innovation as you can get. But we made the call right at the start to put it within innovation, and in that innovation team sits a partnerships team that's looking for exciting partners for NatWest. There's a technology scouting team that's looking around the world at new and emerging technologies. There's a team building sort of rapid prototypes and proof of concepts. And open banking sat alongside all these other colleagues, and that's because from the very beginning we planned to reuse what we were building. We saw this as an opportunity to create an infrastructure, an API infrastructure that would facilitate innovation over the coming years in the bank. And so we made the decision to, I won't say overinvest in it, but we made the decision that this infrastructure would be robust. We'd make it easy for internal teams to onboard. We'd make it scalable, because we really wanted it as an opportunity for the bank to deliver innovation. And then we set about sort of advertising the availability of those APIs across the bank. It's a large bank. There are hundreds of developers working on dozens of projects around the bank. It's actually quite a big effort to sort of make them all aware of what these APIs are available, what they can do, and then they're just available off the shelf for free to enable them to do things quicker and cheaper. The other thing we did was seek a positive relationship with third parties. The whole point of open banking, right, is to bring about competition and more choice for customers. So you could see third parties as a threat, but actually we saw them as an opportunity, because they're giving feedback on our performance. The journeys we're putting the customers through, the response times, things like that, and we can use that feedback to improve the performance of our APIs for our internal teams as well as for third parties. So we look at that feedback and working positively with third parties to help us do better. But also in time, we want to do more with those third parties. So we want to go beyond the mandate, deliver APIs that go well beyond the mandate, and seek input from third parties on what APIs we should be developing. So it was really kind of a positive relationship that we sought with outside of the bank. So those are sort of two or three things we did differently in NatWest, I think, Graham.
Yeah, fantastic. I guess a related point is the questions coming from Eva about how you publicize and share the details of your APIs. Kevin, you've touched on it there. I'll do the shout out certainly for Saxo. I know there's a fantastic developer portal, which I think is developer.saxo.com, that has all the details of the APIs.
Just developer.saxo actually. But
developer.saxo, there you go. Apologies. And for NatWest, is it bankofapis.co.uk?
Yeah, so it was a stroke of genius kind of grabbing that domain, bankofapis.com. a few years ago. So yeah, all of our API documentations, but crucially not just the mandatory API documentation. So it's the front end for users in the open banking system, for third parties wanting to use our open banking APIs. But we're gradually putting all of our additional APIs that are available externally on that portal as well. Obviously, they're not freely available like the open banking APIs, but we invite third parties to propose use cases for those APIs.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, Benny, you mentioned this in one of your earlier comments about some of the internal benefits and how it's sort of ramping up the team. But how do you make sure that is prioritized alongside the sort of the external, sometimes more commercial benefits you get there, or immediately commercial benefits, I should say, when you monetize or try and partner? So what are the real benefits you're seeing internally, and how are people running with that?
Right. I mean, I think it's actually interesting how Kevin said what they decided to do when they started to do their APIs. I should probably mention that when we decided to do it again, so to speak, we actually had two things we wanted to do. Right. The first thing we said, okay, we're going to do an open API, and the second one, the API that we're going to be doing is going to be the basis for our new generation trading platform. Right. So back there in 2014-15, right, we said, okay, everything is going to be HTML5 and everything is going to be against an open API, right? And one of the things that certainly made true was that there was a one use case from the start, that all of the APIs we built, we at least knew we could fulfill one use case, and a pretty challenging one, right? It really is not that easy to build an API that drives a world-class trading platform, as discussed before, with trading prices and real-time updates of events and all of this stuff, right? So it's a pretty good pressure test. At the same time, I think we're proud to say today that we pretty much trust the API because we're using it ourselves, right? Most of the time, if there's a problem with the API, you as a partner, you may notice, but we will probably already have noticed because one of our 100,000 clients will probably have had a problem in the trading platform, right? So there is actually a nice synergy between that we have an API that I can go and commercialize, and then we have an API that we use ourselves. We are essentially building it for ourselves, and then I get to have a little side business, so to speak, to spin it off and externalize it. As I said before, what are the benefits? One benefit is the thing, we can call you and you can send us some people. It's much easier to bring in new people if they only have to focus on the specialty. And I think onto a certain size of company and onto a certain level of complexity, there's still, the full stack developer. And these are good guys also in Saxo, but I think they tend to have more a generalist role and become architects, right? If you really want top-notch user experience, you hire a front-ender. And a front-ender, he's really good at all the front-end technologies, but he doesn't know all the back-end, and he doesn't want to know about all of the Saxo internal business rules for, how would we handle a particular event around a stock issuance or, a corporate action or something like that. So it's much nicer to bring on a front-ender who is really good at, React and HTML and all of this stuff, and tell him, you need to build this, and here's the API. And here's the contract for the API, and just relax, right? If you can understand what the API is doing, it's going to serve your purpose, right? And also, right, because we know that, we try to build a lot of things into the API that if we hadn't had the setup, there might be sitting around in different parts of UI code. If the API is not good enough, then you can always compensate that by that in the UI code and say, well, if it's a stock, then I'm going to do this. Otherwise, if it's something else, I can do something else. So having the API, I think, has definitely allowed us to scale our development significantly, and it's allowed people to come on board and be effective much earlier, right? And just to illustrate this, when we built it the first time, right, or when we launched this, right, we launched our single trading platform, and we had about 80 APIs, I would say, right? So an API is a business entity, a position list or a list of account balances or something like that. We had about 80 of these. Right nowadays, we have about 250. Not all of them are external, but about, I think, 90 of those are external, but we have about 250. And we have almost 20 front-end teams now. And I think there's no way we could actually have 20 front-end teams all working on trading-related platform modules, components, whatever, if there wasn't an API layer that was well documented, right? So it's the scalability, it's the ease of onboarding, and also, as was mentioned both by Jacqui and Kevin, the reusability, right? Okay, so now we have this API, it's serving prices in our trading platform. Guess what? We would like to enhance our client website. So now you can also maybe go on the client website and show some information that we previously had in the trading platform. That's not done by the React front-end team. That's done by the the web development team instead, right? Using a completely different technology. But nevertheless, it's available.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're talking to there, and the questions come in related to this, is a sort of, it's almost that API first type of approach to your internal architecture. You know, the service you provide within the business needs to be done as an API first, and then a user interface or other things might be layered upon that afterwards. And that, I was wondering, Jacqui, how or have you managed to instill that kind of attitude at the DWP? But also, and there's another question's coming, but I think it's very related, is how do you, what's the funding model you can establish around creating and maintaining these APIs? Because the two can be intrinsically linked. To do this stuff well, it needs to be backed and supported in the right kind of way.
Yeah, it is an interesting question, and certainly, engineers like to engineer things. So how do you sell reuse and less engineering to people who are full stack engineers and want to build things? And certainly some of the things that we find when we get an announcement from government that we're going to pay an extra £20 to people, or we're going to introduce a new winter fuel payment, or whatever it is, we just go back to greenfield and we build it. Yeah. And winning the hearts and minds has been really key to us to prevent ourselves from doing that. And that links in with our governance and also bringing people on the journey with you. So I talk a lot, we do an awful lot of evangelism around digital, and we talk a lot about not reinventing something that already exists. The wheel is round and it will always be round. Don't try and invent a triangle one, because it ain't going to work. And thinking about focusing our engineers in the blank spaces rather than on things that have already been done. So finding some of that commonality, I think, is really key. And I think for me, making the journey easy for them. So our portal is really key to our reuse strategy and the things that you were describing there. One of the things that we find that people won't take a difficult path if there's an easy one available. So a new skill emerged for us, technical writers, and working alongside engineering, having the technical writers write up the API, so that as a delivery manager who's always driving for pace and will never take the longer route, the delivery manager will look at what is available in the catalogue to build a service or build a new feature or make an addition, and saying, well, we don't need to start greenfield because here's 15 things that we can connect. And one of the things that we've started moving towards is creating our shared component tray. And our shared component tray, because we're contract first, we've got contracts that can hook out either into a web-based API, a web-based user interface, or our shared component tray can also provide a UI fragment. And the UI fragment can be called as an API. So we don't dictate, we still allow our engineers to decide what's the best route for them. But there is a menu available. If you want to build your own UI screen, you can do so, but you do it within the guide rails and you'll use the API hooks under the hood. Or some of those common services, for example, gathering banking details to make payment, that's common. So the banking API actually provides a UI fragment that is consistent with the UI design. So we're not developing different UIs for each service. And this is all part of us building that holistic citizen journey. So if a citizen gives us their banking details, They only need to do it once, even though they may get 3 or 4 different types of payments. So that's kind of the winning the hearts and minds and allowing people to be creative in the spaces where we need them to be creative, but making the journey easy, doing that user research for the delivering of the developer portal. We don't call it a developer portal, we call it our API exchange. And it's called the API exchange because it's easy for anybody. Everybody in digital has access to it, and they can come and view, they can see what APIs we have available. They're described in a nice plain English format. There's a load of tech stuff sits behind it for the engineers, but for the non-technical people, there's a nice use case, there's a nice demonstration, there's mocking services through the API. So if an engineer wants to give it a go to see if it'll work, they can do so, and they can do all of that before consuming it in a live environment. And that's been really key, making the journey easy.
Yeah, and again, as someone who tinkers with these things, I know if I have to go live, do it in a live environment with all sorts of bells and whistles, and I have to nail the authentication from day one, you don't have the opportunity to play and explore with an API. So it's always fantastic to hear those kind of tools are there. I guess a related point, Kevin, there's a question's come in that's asking for thoughts around commercialization of APIs and associated revenue models, and I guess tied in with the funding model for creating and maintaining them at NatWest. What have you explored at NatWest around that? So going beyond the open banking and actually commercializing things.
So it's early days, but we're very excited about the potential. So I guess we're doing 2 or 3 things. So we're ensuring that every new API we create, we're trying to ensure, so we're not 100% successful yet, but every new API we create, we want to ensure that is externalized. So what I mean by that is it's as easy for a third party outside the bank to use that API as anyone inside the bank to use it. We make it, we advertise its availability on banker APIs, and we seek proposals from third parties to use that API. Like I said, we're in constant conversations with the third parties that are using our mandatory APIs. And as part of those conversations, we always make sure we save time in those meetings for what more do you want? What more could we do together? So I think there's 2 or 3 things emerging, and I hope that we definitely will be doing some commercial deals this year around APIs outside of the open banking framework. I think digital ID is a very interesting space. So open banking left out some key identifying information, just address, phone number, email, etc. There are a lot of third parties see lots of potential for, and we see potential for as well. There's some elements of payments which are not quite covered by PSD2 as well, which could be interesting for commercialization. I mean, we sit on a lot of data processes, credit processes and things like that, that we are gradually API enabling. And like I said, we'll make sure they're all externalized and seek feedback. We've clearly got to be very careful. We treat our customers' data, access to our customers' data very seriously, and so we'll be taking a long, hard look at every proposal which involves sharing customer data, and make sure it's a win-win for our customers, the bank, and for the third party, and that it doesn't do anything to reduce the security of that and the safety of that data, which has and will continue to block proposals, at least for the time being. But yeah, we see lots of exciting opportunities for commercialization. In terms of models, and we're completely open-minded around models. There are models where you charge per API call, or there's revenue share. There's absolutely models where there's not a direct revenue compensation, but because our customers are getting something good out of this, there's a retention play for ourselves as well. It helps us retain customers if we can offer cool things for our customers that our competitors can't do. We don't necessarily need to be receiving revenue from third parties there. So yeah, there's a range of options for commercialization.
Yeah, and I guess that the key thing there is that ultimately the APIs are like any business line, product, service, whatever you want to call it, right? They how they're commercialized depends very much on what that service is, rather than necessarily taking a uniform approach that an API should be commercialized in this particular form. That makes a lot of sense. Benny, I was going to come to you. There's a questions come in, and Jacqui spoke to it a little bit. And what Gerald has asked here is, if your APIs enable customer interactions, how do you guide customer experience and product service principles in those third-party channels? Now, I know in open banking there is guidance around the user experience, and Jacqui, you mentioned there that you actually have some of your APIs are actually serving up the UI component almost. But I guess, Benny, with yourself there, I was wondering, with some of the trading functionality, when you open that to a third-party UI, how do you, or do you govern that external experience?
Yeah, no, I mean, of course we do, right? It depends a little bit, right? As I said, we have different partnership models, right? So, for example, if we are giving access to a bank like, let's say, NatWest, no, nothing happening in this case, but if we were giving access to NatWest and we told them that here is an API that allows you to place trades, we really do not have any say in how they would like to create that user interface. If, on the other hand, we do it with a partner where the client relationship is still the partner presenting a UI to a Saxo Bank's client, then of course we have a say in this. And very likely we don't just do a partnership with some small startup that has a good idea. In the vast majority of partnerships that we have, they are with established financial institutions that have some kind of license already, right? So we have a joint interest in making sure that it becomes a good client experience, and we know that they also know what they're doing. And of course, we have a set of checks along the way where, before we take the application live, we go through a certification process, right? I would like actually just to maybe ping on this, what that was discussed before on the commercialization and the remuneration, stuff like that. And what's already been said is two words I heard is like win-win and partnership, right? Because what we really, and also value, right? But we're really not doing this because it's cool to have an API. And in fact, why I may have a small KPI for how many trades I can get through our OpenAPI, the whole idea at Saxo really is that we're just an enabler for yet another partnership, right? So the partnership typically starts not just with me, it starts actually with somebody from our Saxo Advanced Solutions team meeting with a potential broker or financial institution in some country and saying, hey, we have this client base out here that we think we are better at addressing than you are, Saxo Bank, right? And then we start thinking about, okay, how could a solution like that be done? And because now we have APIs, very often the solution is to offer to these clients, that financial institution's front end and our engine, right? We put like many hundred years of man years into the engine. Just like Kevin said, they have lots and lots of information and policies and processes that a local financial institution with a smaller focus may not have. But what they have is they have better knowledge and access to a particular client segment, right? It's actually interesting to know that Saxo is in many areas or in many countries more or less competing with somebody who's also using our technology. But that's fine. They have something else. It's almost like the last mile problem, right? I mean, there's a number of or a few back-end telcos, and then there are a lot of other companies that are better at serving the last mile. And that is fine for us because they're doing something and we're doing something. And together, we're offering a better solution for the client at the end. And that's what it's really all about. And because we're doing that, we're creating value. And then when we start talking about, how do we get paid? As Kevin says, there are various ways, but let's start by creating more value. And then we can figure out how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the common theme here we're seeing right across all these organizations, all these opportunities is about creating new, better experiences, reaching customers in better ways. And that generates value in disparate ways. And the skill, the art is in finding and supporting that value generation. I'm conscious of time, and there's still loads of questions that have flooded in. I thought I'd try and end on a fun note. So Colin here has asked, what's the most surprising thing any of you have seen developed with your APIs? And I'm internal or external. I'm guessing from some of the conversations, there's probably not a partner that suddenly just jumped up and created something bonkers. But is there an idea of something that was just very left field that you don't think would have come about if you hadn't had those APIs there? And I'm opening that to anyone. No surprises. There you go, Colin. Everyone knows what's going to happen.
It's not particularly fun, but it was a surprise, and it's very, very important. I think what's emerged from open banking is third parties that have stepped up to lend responsibly to individuals who might not be able to get credit from main banks. And it is this. I mean, you can call it subprime, but the subprime lending sector has a bad name in the UK. There's some well-established brand names that have come and gone. But what open banking has allowed the change to happen is that now lenders can monitor the activity on current accounts, so they can really much better understand affordability and when borrowers might be getting into trouble, get early warnings for when borrowers might be getting into trouble. And it's kind of almost reinvigorated lending appetite, I think, for those customers who maybe just fall just below the lending appetite of main banks. So I think there's I won't mention names, but there's a handful of lenders and intermediaries using our current account data through open banking to facilitate, to enable lending to customers that it's not within our lending appetite. And I think that's just, as far as I can tell, that's been done really responsibly because the data allows it to be done responsibly. The open banking data allows it to be done responsibly. So that was a real surprise. I don't think, I certainly wasn't predicting that would happen before open banking, and a lot of the strategy reports that came out before open banking didn't call that out as a potential use case. So it was a surprise, but it's a really positive surprise.
I think for me, the biggest surprise for me has been since we published our APIs in the cross-government API catalogue, the demand for some of those APIs has risen exponentially. And I think one of the cases that I would say came as a real surprise is the NHS API that I talked about earlier in terms of doing the benefit check. NHS, a different arm of NHS, saw that API in the catalogue and identified they had been struggling with one of their benefits. It's a Healthy Start payment that's paid to low-income families. It's only worth £5 a week, but it's there to promote healthy eating for the under fives. And it has a very, very low uptake, and they were looking at how they could improve the uptake for that benefit with low-income families, again, needed more than ever right now. And when they identified the API that we already had, it meets 90% of their needs. So we're in the process of just looking at adding in a new feature to enable them to deliver a fully automated service. And that's something that they had been struggling with for some time. So for me, it shows the power of sharing your APIs in a good, readable way, not just in a technical way, but with people who are trying to solve real business outcomes, real business problems, and sharing that in a nice, easy way that helps people root through your catalogue and find what they want. It's like the kind of Amazon of APIs, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful example to end on there. So I want to say, massive thank you, Benny, Kevin, and Jacqui, for joining me here. The value you are all generating from APIs is phenomenal. Like, there's a lot of interest in this topic and the expertise, the experiences you've had. So please do continue to share and be open about what's happening in your various organizations. It is much appreciated by all of us. With that, I will like say thank you and hand back over to Claire to close out for us.
Yeah, thank you so much for that really interesting discussion. And thank you for the questions. We had far more than we'd ever have been able to get to, but thank you so much. And I just want to remind you, if you do complete the survey, as well as the donation to the Trussell Trust, you can request a copy of Graham's white paper on this subject. So all that leaves me to say is thank you so much to our panelists today. That really was a really interesting panel discussion and great engagement from the audience there. And thank you to Graham for chairing the event, and thank you to you all for attending, and we hope we see you on the next one. Bye for now.